Hello animal vets and special agent pets. Aaron here, back with a veterinarian.
IFA the veterinarian.
What does he do? How does he support his team? Why is he just Perry personified? Before I answer most of these questions, I just have to say that if you do like this content or find it informative, why not take a bite out of that peppermint crisp tart flavored subscribe button down below. But with that done, let's jump our way right into IFA's overview. IFA is a support driver that focuses on buffing the damage of taser teams while on field. His skill has him ascend into the air, enter the Night Soul Blessing state, and gain 80 Night Soul points. While in this state, pressing or holding the normal attack button will cause him to fire a tonic shot, dealing animal damage and healing the entire team based on his elemental mastery. IFA's elemental burst deals AoE burst damage in an area and summons a wind tunnel that gathers enemies towards the center. When this ability hits an enemy afflicted with Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo, it will apply a sedation mark to them that will deal damage corresponding to the elemental type the enemy was afflicted with after a short delay. His first Ascension passive grants IFA a rescue essential point for each Night Soul point the entire team currently has while he is in his elemental skills Night Soul Blessing state. IFA's Ascension 4 passive will simply increase his elemental mastery by 80 for 10 seconds after Night Soul Burst is triggered. IFA's talent priority is straightforward. Most of his value comes from sources outside of his own kit, and his personal damage as an on-field unit is, well, let's just say it's not winning any awards. That's why your first and only real priority should be leveling his skill, which boosts the only aspect of value he has in his talents, his healing. After that, you can safely ignore his other talents, but if you really want to invest further, prioritize his burst over his normal attacks. For combos, IFA has two main roles. How you use him depends on your team's setup. As an on-field driver DPS hybrid, you'll want to first pop his burst, but only when facing multiple enemies since it provides some solid grouping. However, since its damage and application is pitiful, you'll want to avoid using it when against a single target. It would actually hurt your DPS. Afterward, follow up with his skill, then hold the normal attack button to keep applying the Animo element, Viridescent Venrir, and heal your team. Keep going until your off-field DPS units stop dealing damage or until his elemental skill's duration runs out. As a support for an Animo DPS, use his skill to put him in the Night Soul Blessing state, then fire off a normal attack to make full use of the Scroll of Cinder City artifact set. Once that's done, swap into your Animo DPS for the real damage to begin. With IFA's base kit out of the way, let's dive into his constellations and what they bring to the table. IFA's C1 restores 6 energy to him once per 8 seconds when he hits an enemy with his elemental skills bullets. Sounds useful until you realize IFA's elemental burst is optional. It adds a little grouping, some minor damage, and a sprinkle of extra application. Not enough to justify using it constantly. Plus, he's usually run in taser teams, which already flood him with energy thanks to top tier batteries like Fischl, Overrun, and Electro Resonance. He already has enough energy at C0 for a burst he doesn't need. Easily his worst constellation is essentially dead weight. His second constellation increases the amount of rescue essential points he obtains from his passive by 4 times when the total team's current Night Soul point amount is above 60. Additionally, it increases the cap of his rescue essential points by 50. This does give your team a decent bump in reaction damage, but it's nothing groundbreaking overall. More of a nice to have than a must have. C3 increases his elemental skill level by 3 and improves both his healing and damage, but again, nothing game changing. IFA's fourth constellation increases his elemental mastery by 100 after he uses his elemental burst, and it also increases the duration of the wind tunnel created by his elemental burst by 3 seconds. Better grouping, better healing, better reaction potential, but still not enough elemental mastery or crowd control to really make a difference. What a letdown. His fifth constellation increases his elemental burst level by 3, increasing his damage by a little bit in turn. And finally, we have IFA's C6, which grants him a 50% chance to fire an additional bullet in his elemental skill that will deal damage equal to 120% of his attack. Additionally, he will consume 20% less Night Soul points and phlogiston while out of combat. This constellation is his best by far, and is, in all honesty, his only good one. All the others offer minor damage boosts for himself or the team, but this one increases his personal damage by a pretty decent chunk, while also increasing the animal application and healing of his skill by 50%. On top of that, it conveniently lets him use his flying state for 20% longer while exploring. This simple enhancement leads to so many different buffs that the difference between an IFA with a C6 and without is night and day. IFA's constellations overall, honestly pretty underwhelming. Most of them offer minor damage boosts to a unit who, at best, contributes to about 25% of the team's total damage. Only his C6 stands out as something actually impactful, as it improves his kit across the board and feels like a proper payoff. It's a shame though seeing them backtrack from Janson's great constellations and return to the mostly useless 4-star standard start with IFA. With his kit all wrapped up, it's time to gear up IFA starting with artifact options. Viridescent Fenrir is IFA's go-to set, no question. It boosts animo damage, cranks up swirl damage, and comes with a powerful 4-piece effect that shreds enemy resistances by a whopping 40%. These huge buffs are massive, not only for IFA's own damage, but for his entire team too. His animo attacks hit harder, his swirls deal more damage, and even his burst-generated marks pack a bigger punch thanks to the debuff. It is the perfect artifact set for him and will always be his go-to. Obsidian Codex is also a viable option if you're planning to run IFA as a hypercarry. It gives a 15% damage bonus in the 2-piece and a juicy 40% crit rate in the 4-piece, but it comes at the cost of losing Viridescent's team-wide damage boost. So, because of IFA's relatively low damage output, unless your team's built around hyper buffing only him, Viridescent will almost always outperform it. Then there's the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City set. This one is niche, but still great for when you're running IFA purely as a support for another animo DPS like Wanderer or Xiao. He won't reach the same broken support levels as Uruzan, Bennett, Xianyun, or Fiorina, but with this set and Thrilling Tales, he can hold his own surprisingly well. Still, outside of that specific role, Viridescent remains the king of his artifact options. When it comes to main stats, we're not focusing on IFA's hypercarry playstyle here. It needs C6 to be even halfway decent, and with the more recent nerfs, it's just not worth the investment. Instead, we're leaning into what he really shines at, support. Even though he doesn't need specific stats to max out his reaction buffs, Elemental Mastery is still usually the best main stat across the board. His personal damage is super low, so EM helps him deal damage despite his terrible scalings. That said, IFA naturally has a ton of EM baked into his kit, and since his healing is abysmal unless he's at C6, there's actually a strong case for running a healing bonus circlet. The damage drop is also minimal, just 3 to 4%, since you can easily patch up the lost EM with substats. Speaking of substats, they're not as crucial since his weapon and main stats do most of the heavy lifting. But if you're aiming to min-max, shoot for at least 800 Elemental Mastery on the stats screen. If you can go even higher, go for it. After that, throw in some crit for a tiny damage boost and attack for his personal damage output to scale slightly better. But don't stress over those too much. Elemental Mastery should be prioritized over anything else for IFA. With artifacts done with, let's move on to IFA's weapon options, which thankfully are pretty free-to-play friendly overall. 1,000 Floating Dreams is IFA's dream weapon. It gives him everything he could ask for: a solid base attack, a massive 264 Elemental Mastery, and a 30% damage bonus to all of his attacks, including the multi-element marks from his Elemental Burst. On top of that, it passively buffs your entire team's Elemental Mastery stat by 40. This might not sound huge, but considering most of his teammates won't be building into Elemental Mastery, that bonus translates to an 8 to 12% electrocharge damage boost for them. In short, it's busted, and it's perfect for a support IFA. Surprisingly, next is Skyward Atlas, which gives IFA the highest personal damage numbers right now, even though it's not an EM-focused weapon. But since IFA already hits 1000 EM easily without needing any Elemental Mastery weapon, and since Elemental Mastery suffers from diminishing returns, stacking more is not always optimal. Atlas offers raw damage and another layer of scaling that pushes his numbers just high enough to outpace most support weapons in total output. So if you are really pining for a damage build for him, Skyward Atlas will be the best option available. Next up is the best free-to-play option he has, Hakushin Ring. It's got a good base attack and energy recharge stat, but the real kicker here is the passive, a 20% damage bonus to Electro, Hydro, and Animo damage for your whole team. That's a universal team-wide buff that applies to every unit he's paired with, regardless of damage scaling type. The only downside, his best partner Fiorina already dishes out a ton of damage percent buffs, reducing the total effectiveness of Hakushin Ring. Despite that, Hakushin Ring is still a beast and beats out almost every other option, both in teams with Fiorina and not. Gunny Morning Sleep In pumps out a ton of Elemental Mastery for IFA, even though he can't activate its passive via skill damage. It's perfect for trying to reach the highest reaction damage and healing numbers possible, but not much else. Unlike Mizuki, whose Elemental Mastery stat directly converts into even more reaction damage, IFA just doesn't get the same level of payoff from Elemental Mastery beyond a point. Because EM also has diminishing returns, and since this catalyst doesn't boost team utility like Hakushin does, it ends up underperforming even compared to 4-star options. Wandering Even Star is another option that offers some solid perks, EM in the substat and a flat attack buff for the team. Not bad. The only issue? One of IFA's best teammates, Fiorina, scales with HP, not attack, so the buff is completely wasted on her. That said, if you're not running Fiorina, and if you got someone like Xingqiu instead, Even Star jumps way up in value. For a type member is also another option he has that really shines when IFA's paired with Fiorina. Most of its stats aren't particularly useful for him, but the passive's healing feeds Fiorina's fanfare stacks, which boosts the team's damage. It's a clever synergy, but even then, it can't quite keep up with Hakushin Ring, which consistently gives about 6% more team-wide damage in Fiorina comps without the restrictive downside. Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer is last up, since its only benefit is the attack buff to one party member in the passive. This weapon is not particularly strong for IFA and his best teams. However, if you're running IFA as a pure support for strong animo DPS like Wanderer or Zhao, TTDS is gold. It provides a huge attack boost to one teammate, which those hypercarry units can fully capitalize on. Outside of that, it's not worth considering, but in the right setup, it can be his best in slot. These weapons are great, but to unlock IFA's full potential, you've got to pair him with the right teammates. Synergy is everything. Fiorina is IFA's best support hands down. Why? She thrives with the team-wide healer, and IFA brings exactly that to the table. Sure, his healing isn't top tier on its own, but with the right setup, it becomes good enough. And in return, he gives her a lot. Damage bonus from Hakushin Ring, 40% resistance shred from Viridescent, and an easy way to trigger her buffs thanks to his healing. What's more, both Fiorina and IFA provide team-wide damage increases, which massively amplify your entire party's output. The catch? You'll still need solid sub-DPS units to take advantage of all of that buffing potential, and right now, the pool is a little shallow, with Fiorina and Fischl being the only real standouts. Speaking of, Fischl is the next synergy that is practically mandatory for IFA's taser teams. Her damage is already nuts, but what really makes her shine is her insane electro application. She pumps out so much that she can generate electrocharge reactions fast enough to outpace the increase in damage a Natlin unit would provide IFA's electrocharged buff. What makes Fischl especially great is how well she scales with all the buffs IFA and Fiorina bring. She makes better use of the team-wide damage boosts than any other electro unit right now, and her presence alone elevates the team's performance to a whole new level. Finally, there's Overrun, and while he might not stand out on his own, he and IFA make a solid duo. IFA covers Overrun's biggest weakness as a utility-focused off-fielder, lack of defensive support, while boosting both his personal damage and reaction output. In return, Overrun buffs IFA with attack percent, damage percent, and his Night Soul points, which enhances IFA's swirl and electrocharge damage buff. Plus, his elemental burst provides grouping, which helps IFA hit multiple targets more consistently. Together, they might not be meta-defining, but their natural synergy makes them consistently strong enough to perform, well, just well. With synergies done with, let's move on to applying these synergies to team comps. IFA thrives as a driver in taser teams. His ability to boost electrocharge damage combined with his synergy with strong team-wide buffing catalysts make him a natural fit here. While other animo units like Sucrose can technically buff the team more, IFA brings something she doesn't, team-wide healing. That healing lets him replace a traditional defensive unit, opening up more room for damage healers. However, the most classic taser teams already have this covered. Beidou and Jingshou were and still are the perfect defensive support duo for their insane 66% damage mitigation, shields, and healing, diminishing IFA's additional support value. However, in fights where there's unavoidable or constant damage, IFA's sustained team healing becomes a game changer. However, there's still a catch. He's only truly valuable here if the rest of the comp clicks perfectly into place. Miss even one key piece, and his usefulness drops off hard. Outside of those teams though, IFA does not have much going for him. Another way to use him is as a hyper carry, but IFA's personal damage just isn't it. Using him this way sacrifices all the support value he brings just to patch up his incredibly underwhelming scaling. Thus, you end up with decent damage, but it's still not enough to justify the cost. It's so weak that even when used as a hyper carry, you're much better off sticking to his strength. Taser teams with Fiorina, Fischl, and maybe Yansan for an alternate electro support. At least then, the rest of his kit would be put to good use. The final and most slept on role he has is as a support for animo main DPS units like Zhao or Wanderer. IFA is one of the only two characters in the game who can fully use the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City set to buff other animo characters, and since IFA's Catalyst user, also run Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, giving your on-field animo DPS a massive attack boost. Put those two buffing tools together, and you've got a strong, free-to-play friendly support option that can act as a decent substitute for a limited one. He won't outperform powerhouses like Farusan or Bennett, but he gets the job done. Now with team comps out of the way, let's wrap things up with IFA's rating. Let's be honest, IFA's personal damage is low, especially for an on-field character. His base attack is tiny, and his scaling's even worse. He has to rely on elemental reactions just to stay relevant, and even then, transformative reactions like Electrocharged have been becoming less and less useful as time goes on, unless you're specifically in AoE heavy content. Considering that, his damage just does not cut it. 2 out of 5. IFA's elemental application is limited and clunky. It's tied to his normal attacks and the initial hit of his elemental burst, both of which require on-field time, while the former can't hit multiple enemies very consistently. That's a huge downside for a character meant to support others. 1.5 out of 5 for application. Offensive support is where he starts to show some promise. IFA brings a nice Electrocharge damage buff, access to Viridescent Fenrir, and the ability to use support catalysts like Hakushin Ring or Thrilling Tales. That's a pretty good toolkit, but still not quite enough to make him a go-to offensive support, especially since he is locked to a niche. 3 out of 5. For battery potential, he generates 4 to 5 particles on the first normal attack after using his elemental skill. While that doesn't do much for most teams, it's very easy to trigger, making him a useful battery for animo DPS units like Zhao. Situational, but serviceable. 2.5 out of 5. IFA's healing is rough. It's going to only be about 300 to 400 healing per shot, but it is to the entire team. While that does sound decent on paper, it's barely enough to keep up with Furina's HP draining mechanic and nowhere near enough to replace a real healer. He tries, but doesn't quite deliver. 1.5 out of 5. In terms of flexibility and versatility right now, IFA's only real niches are as a driver in taser teams and a support or animo DPS units. His utility outside of those setups is limited, and while he does bring some defensive value, it's not reliable enough to count on. If a comp doesn't fit perfectly around him, he falls flat, earning him a 1 out of 5. Overall, IFA is a good support for taser teams due to his strong offensive buffs and healing that's enough to sustain an entire team in some situations, netting him a poor 2 out of 5. IFA has his moments. He brings solid team-wide buffs, a touch of healing, and pairs really well with Furina and Fischl. His reaction damage can hit decently in AoE scenarios, and he does have a few unique synergies going for him. At the end of the day, he just doesn't offer enough. His damage is too low, his healing too weak, and his playstyle demands on-field time that would be better spent on someone who can actually carry. IFA isn't a jack, he's a joker of all trades, master of none, and in a meta filled with hyper-optimized units, he is unable to elevate your team in any meaningful way. But that's all I have to say about IFA. Now tell me your thoughts. What do you think of IFA? Do you intend to use him in the role he was made to be in, or are you looking to use him in another niche? Do you intend to build him with full elemental mastery, or are you planning to go full hyper carry with him? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. But with that, I will wish you all farewell. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.